It's extremely meaningful and relevant that we're meeting on this campus. Remarkably meaningful. And in a moment, I will tell you why. Separately, I walked here past the Shard the first time I've been close to the building, and you think of the great architecture there, Renzo Piano, the great architect. But every architect needs an engineer to build it, to build that building. We have heard already tonight 2 architects telling you why. And now I know why Zara asked me to speak. I am the engineer to tell you how. Because working a campaign like this, it needs a how. I'm going to talk very briefly about the UN, what it can do, what other organizations can do, and finally, what we together can do. As far as the UN General Assembly, the Security Council, we know how powerless the world's powers are together when they disagree on a situation like Syria. And I can tell you nothing that you don't already know. But Zara asked me to talk about the relevance of the UNESCO World Heritage Convention. And as we know, in Syria has 5 of the endangered sites. There are 44 worldwide, and it might interest you to know that Liverpool is another endangered site. Because the city of Liverpool, the maritime history of Liverpool, is so important that, like the World Heritage sites in London, Westminster Abbey, close to us here, and the Houses of Parliament and so on, you must have a strategic view where you can see this World Heritage site and you can see why it is a World Heritage site, why it is part of our heritage. And therefore, you cannot build skyscrapers close to Westminster Abbey and the Houses of Parliament, because that would strip away the heritage of that location. And the city of Liverpool is in danger of losing its World Heritage status because they want to build a 10-story building adjacent to the actual heritage part. Now in Syria, of course, the 5 sites, the actual cities, which you will know are Aleppo, Damascus, Bosra, the villages in North Syria, and interestingly, the castles of the Crusaders and Saladin. These, understandably, are all under threat. And we saw on the earlier video the representative of UNESCO report that the Director General of UNESCO actually shared her concern of all parties and asked all parties in the conflict to safeguard the country's cultural heritage. That was on the 30th of August. But you know, it's important that other organizations working in the same field do the same thing. And I think even though the UK is not a member of the Islamic equivalent of UNESCO, what is the Islamic equivalent of UNESCO doing in the same field? I noticed that in 2009, it held a conference on preserving religious and cultural landmarks in occupied Al-Quds in Jerusalem. But I want to know what this Islamic organization based in Rabat is doing now to support what you are doing, because we've seen what UNESCO did. They're meeting this weekend in Fez to discuss dialogue of cultures and religions. And I think one of the things that we can do is to get a message to that organization showing your concern for this particular issue. I say this because I've gone through this afternoon the press releases of the Islamic equivalent of UNESCO to see whether they have made any comment about the desecration in May in Damascus. They've taken the easy targets, the Al-Aqsa Mosque in Jerusalem, and the easy target of terrorist bombing last week in Baghdad. But Syria? Nothing. And you are the people, because you are organized in this country, when the reasons are 2 architects have given the reason why, you are in a much better position to make that impact on the Islamic organization than maybe those within the Islamic states. I say this also because, as was mentioned earlier, I go to Egypt every year, to the city of Alexandria, for the great library there. And you will know of the great heritage of that library. But every time I walk through Tahrir Square over the last 10 years, there's always a bit of a protest going outside the American embassy at one end, but nothing outside the League of Arab States, the other end of Tahrir Square. But after the revolution in 2011, suddenly, outside the offices of the League of Arab States, the sleepiest organization there was at that time, suddenly there were tents everywhere. People saying to the organization, "What are you doing about Syria?" The young Egyptians found their voice. But not just the young Egyptians, the young Syrians who were living in Cairo. Now, wherever you come from, you have these particular channels that you can use. And through this new organization, you perhaps have the mouthpiece to exercise that. There's another aspect which our two architects have been speaking about, and that is intangible heritage. The actual why we do what we do. And this is another UNESCO convention. What makes British intangible heritage? It's the memory, it's our customs, it's our folklore. And in Birmingham, they would say, it's the introduction of Baltic curry. This is part of, they don't have a Baltic curry in India, but we do in Britain. And this is going to become part of our folklore. I was born in this city during the war. So you can understand that I identify so closely with this particular country. But so many of you here have the same passport as me. So the visions that you have, the energy that you have, will become part of the intangible heritage of this country. I welcome that. That's very important. And therefore, you must use not the weapons, the tools to make sure that your input is as valuable as mine. Let me talk about another aspect of the United Nations at work, again through UNESCO, and that is, it's relating to Syria. It's the Hague Convention on the Protection of Cultural Property in the event of armed conflict. Now, Syria, like the UK, is a signatory to this document. It was caused really in the First World War because the observers for artillery would sit at the top of churches and view the enemy and direct the artillery. The enemy, the Germans and the British, knew that was happening, so we blasted off the tops of every church, every cathedral, every temple, every monastery. And this new convention came in that these institutions should not be targets of war. But in the end, rather like what happened in Damascus, who knows who did it? And so in 1999, a new protocol to that convention was introduced. If a cultural institution or religious building is targeted, then we want to know the name of the commander who did it. And that is the way the world, people like you, the youngest of you here, will see this protocol brought into reality. Now, in 2004, that is now the convention in all the countries that signed that convention. We want to know the name of the commander. But did Syria sign? No, they did not. Did the UK sign? No, it has not. So it's pressure sometimes on your own country to pressurize another. One of the commitments of that particular protocol is to identify those cultural sites in your own country which should not be attacked. Now, maybe we ought to identify the ones in this country or the ones in Syria, even though we cannot influence the governments of either, just to start that movement going. And an organization like this is the type of body that can do that. I now come to some of the things that we might be able to do. If we're going to send a statement to the Fez meeting of the Islamic Conference on Education, Science and Cultural Organizations, I think we can put a document together. If we have to identify the Muslim sites, and we've heard the architects identify some of them, let's start now. We might only have 100 in Syria and 20 in Iraq or 50 in Iraq, but someone's got to start this whole process to put pressure on those governments to say, are you going to defend these places? We know in our hearts that when it came to the desecration of the companion of the Prophet, it was not a state responsible. It was a non-state actor. And in a way, the international institutions are powerless in that respect. But we've got to use these as the ways in which we can make progress. Thirdly, the Islamic ambassadors in this country are targets. Collectively, they're a target. Have we thought of going to them and saying, your organization, this organization, requires the Dean of the Court of St. James, that's in fact the Kuwait ambassador, to pull together his Islamic colleagues and to say, listen to us. We are Muslims in the UK and these are our concerns. What are we going to collectively do about it? You might say that's difficult. Well, I've done it. Last year, the Olympic Games, as you'll know, the origins of the Olympic Games in Greece was based on the Olympic Truce. Only if there was a truce between the warring Greek tribes could they go through each other's territory to get to Olympia to play the Games. The Olympic Truce is the basis on which the Olympic Games is established. And so every ambassador in New York at the United Nations agreed the principle of the Olympic Truce, as they do, and as they will do again before the Russian Winter Games this winter. So then what do the ambassadors do? They've signed it, they've gone off. So I said to the Kuwait ambassador last year, I said, you write to every ambassador in London and get them to recommit themselves to the Olympic Truce. And 100 did. And we have the book with their names and their photographs and their commitment. So the diplomatic community are your target as well. They are here to be the eyes and ears, whether it's a Saudi or whether it's whoever it does, of what's happening in this country. But only if you speak with a collective voice will you have that impact. And I think that is something that's well within the capability of this organization. The League of Arab States has an office in this country too. They've got to listen to you. You have to set the agenda. You must no longer be the people have the agenda set to you. You are now, the Muslim community in this country is powerful enough. But what until now it has not been is organized. In my view, it has been hopelessly fragmented. And it's a time for that to finish. You've heard our second architect speak of how people can come together, what unites you. I wouldn't dare make the comments about the different sections of Islam that he did, but he can do that. And if he can do that, then you can respond to that and speak with a single voice. And that, if the Muslim community in this country spoke with that single voice, that, I believe, would be a tremendous gift, not just to Islam, but to all people of faith worldwide. This might be the place where it's easier to do it than others. Times are advancing, but I mentioned before why it's so relevant that we're meeting here in the campus of Guy's and St. Thomas. Because who was Thomas Guy? Thomas Guy was a man who made money in the 18th century out of a tremendous swindle in a way, selling Bibles unlicensed at the time, but he made money in other ways in South America. And he felt quite guilty. So he started a hospital, Guy's Hospital. And Guy's Hospital, he took in all the incurables from the nearby St. Thomas's Hospital. And who was St. Thomas? Thomas à Becket was an Archbishop of Canterbury. And famously, he was assassinated by 4 knights of King Henry II, who misheard him when he said, "Who will rid me of this troublesome priest?" they went immediately, thinking they were serving their king, and killed the Archbishop of Canterbury. The furore that followed this led to canonization and beatification. He became a saint. And his grave in Canterbury Cathedral was visited by so many people who wanted to kiss the stone, kiss the grave, that they had to put a hole in the stone slab above so people could lean in and kiss the grave. But the monks were worried that the body might be taken. And so he was moved to a different part of the cathedral. And there his body remained. Until 300 years later, another English king, Henry VIII, had another fight with the Pope and tore down the monasteries. And he took up the grave of Thomas à Becket and ground down the bones and dispersed them and said, "No, nobody speak about this man again." Well, that is the faith that Reverend Nadim and me, we share. And here we are. It is part of our intangible heritage. It is part of what makes us who we are. And yet, all of us have the same will to combine our faith to that dark side of our personalities, which is in all faiths, in all humankind. You cannot identify it with one particular religion or another. It's within humanity, alas. And we have to marry that with the principle of human rights, through the Universal Declaration of Human Rights, which followed the last war, the most terrible war in history, which talked about the barbarism that we saw in Damascus, the barbarism that we saw in Europe and in other parts during the Great War. So it's important now we concentrate on the how. You are the community that's going to make this organization work. And if you show that leadership, you will have the support of Christians and Jews and Hindus and others in this country. Because this city of London is the media center of the world. New York, Washington, Moscow, they're nothing compared to this place. If you speak with a common voice, the world will hear. That's what brings us all together. Thank you very much.